One of the things that that I want to also comment on is in Representative Frankel and in Representative Nelson, we have two people coming from particular communities that have known the scourge of hate. And I think it's important that we recognize that, but that those of us who may not have been in those spaces also take affirmative steps to call out racism and hate as it occurs. And I had an incident in my district fairly recently. I grew up in the Frankford neighborhood of Philadelphia, fantastic working class neighborhood in Philly, and I represent that neighborhood still, never really moved away. And in the 70s and 80s, on the street, the N-word was something thrown about without shame. And there was actually a time I remember my dad had to tell my grandfather, his dad, we don't say that anymore. And my parents really represented a break from the attitudes about race and about hate that were pervasive. And they made real conscious decisions for me and my 6 white brothers and sisters on how we were going to interact with people of all races and backgrounds. And they taught us that everybody's equal, everybody has something to teach us, and that we just have to be open to those messages. That message still needs consistent reinforcement. And, one of the things that, we would like to think that we've evolved to a space where we don't have to call out hate when it is part of another crime, part of another action. But it really is a fierce weed, and you have to get at it by the roots. And I'll give you an example in my own life. About 15 years ago, I was walking in the subway concourse in Philly and had a kid just crack me in the jaw. He was a young black teenager, and my jaw split in half, and I'm left sitting here. Why did you do that? And that kid was never caught. The friends that he was doing it for, the knockout game, nothing ever happened to them. But for me, it took me years to process fear and anger and the idea that I would be looking over my shoulder every time a young black kid would walk past me. And eventually, I realized that I had those feelings, and I had to consciously remind myself that that attack was one single kid. It was not an entire group of people. And even now today, 15 years ago, I still have to catch my ways, when I'm acting in ways that reflect an underlying bias that come from 5 generations of my family in the neighborhood and what that brought out. Now, I'm not going to ever defend the intolerance of my ancestors, but I do have a duty to my descendants to be better. And I have to be a constant gardener of my own thoughts and my own spirit if I want to pull out that weed. And that's why this is legislation that is necessary. We always, no matter how far we think we've come, always need to be conscious in calling out And I commend Representative Frankel and Representative Nelson, especially for focusing on how this is done and how the focus is on direct intention. And the idea that that is actually a very difficult thing to determine. But if someone does leave you the indicia of what their thoughts are, what their mind is, what their spirit is, and that spirit is filled with hate, then yeah, we do have to be calling that out. And again, I just think this is a very difficult issue, calls out the emotions, but our communities that have gone through and lived through hate and discrimination and violence against them on those for those reasons are the people that we need to be allies of. And I sit here with my privilege based on my own race and my own gender. And I know that it doesn't get anywhere unless allies are present. And so I will stand as an ally in this and vote for these bills.